Excited you guys are here because we are kicking off a brand new series just for 2 weeks. And over the next 2 weeks, we are doing this series called Inferno. And for the next 2 weeks, we are talking about what God has to say about anger. And let's be honest, is there a better time to talk about anger than right before an election or right before the holiday season? Am I right? Like, this is the time we should be talking about this stuff, because I don't know if you guys have noticed that in our culture, anger's kind of a big deal. Like, we're all pretty angry about something. Either we get angry about stuff, or we have close friends or relatives, neighbors or coworkers that are angry a lot. We just deal with anger on a constant basis. And what we're going to kind of dig into is anger isn't necessarily a bad thing either. We're actually going to dig into how this emotion of anger isn't a bad thing, but the bad comes when this emotion gets out of control and becomes kind of like this inferno, this out of control fire. Because by show of hands, we just talked about it. How many of you guys enjoy just a nice fire? Just sitting around a fire. Everyone. I've done like a survey before, like it's like half and half. This is like everybody. Everyone loves a fire. I agree with you. I really enjoy a nice fire. There was one time I was in high school. We were on vacation in North Carolina, and my best friend Dale came with us. And Dale and I just had this ability with each other. If we were left to our own devices, we were going to do something that would be dangerous and stupid. That's just what Dale and I did together. And we were on vacation, and off of the bedroom that we were by bedroom in the house, there's this nice little deck, and outside of that deck was this little 3-wick citronella candle that kind of looked like this. We were just sitting there, we light that citronella candle, and keeps the bugs away. It's kind of nice. And it was kind of a chilly night, and so we just had this idea of, hey, let's just light this candle and see if it'll give off some sort of heat. It probably won't, but let's just do it. So we do that, but the night kept getting colder, but we were enjoying hanging out outside. And so we also was a big bag of Bazooka Joe bubble gum. How many of you guys remember Bazooka Joe bubble gum? Yeah, a few of you guys. This right here. The gum was disgusting, let me just be clear, but inside each wrapper of Bazooka Joe bubble gum was these little comics, and the comics were kind of fun. We'd read the comics, but what Dale and I started doing was in that citronella candle, we'd take the comics after we read them and just threw it into the candle. And it started making a little bit bigger fire. Next thing you know, we didn't have like a 3-wick candle going. We had this little fire going. It was actually really nice. It was creating some heat. It was making it comfortable for him and I to hang out outside, just talking music and life or whatever that may be. We start talking this stuff over this fire we are creating. And then so each piece of wrapper would go into it. The fire would get bigger. It works out, and we're creating this warmth, and it was awesome. But then the night was kind of winding down, and so we had to kind of put out the fire. And so what Dale and I naturally just thought, because, you firemen with the hose, you have a fire, you just take a glass of water, we'll dump it out into the candle. But any of you guys know what happens when you dump water into a citronella candle? If you don't, why don't you check this out real quick. This isn't us. This is not live footage, but this is what happens. This is just a little 1-wick citronella candle. There you go. So imagine a 3-wick citronella candle that's filled with all these papers, so this fire is much bigger, and we take a glass of water and we dump it into that candle. Let me tell you something. My eyebrows took a long time to grow back after that, because it just big flaming ball shoots out of this thing. But the problem is then all this water is sitting in this candle, and it starts spewing flames out because this, all the wax starts shooting around. And Dale and I are freaking out, wondering, what are we going to do? We were going to burn down this house that we're staying at right now. My mom and my brothers are fast asleep. They have no idea what's going on. And this crazy situation is playing out, and this fire is out of control. We can't control it. It's dangerous. We're kind of hiding behind other pieces of furniture. And thankfully, all of a sudden, Dale's science class just kicked in all of a sudden. He ran into the house. I'm thinking, he just bailed on me. Like, I'm going to burn out here alive. This is it for me. He comes back in with baking soda and dumps that on it, and that put out the fire. And thankfully, he was paying attention in science class, because I sure wasn't. But that fire was out of control. And sure enough, at the end, we kind of assessed the damage, and there was like wax and like damage all over the table. And we did what any mature teenager would do in that situation, and we told nobody. Like, literally, we locked that door. No one went to that back deck, and we didn't even confess it to my family until I think months later what happened. But this is the reason I share that story, because our anger can kind of become like that fire, where when it's nice and warm and it's under control, it can be used for useful things. It can, like that fire under control kept us warm, but that fire out of control put us in danger. And a lot of times our anger is the same way. When our anger is under control, it can be used for healthy things. It could spur us on to make a difference in our lives and the people around us. But oftentimes our anger, it gets out of control. And it turns us into flamethrowers where we start hurting the people around us and starts hurting ourselves as well. Because the truth is, all of us can get angry. I think all of us do get angry. And just for fun, let's just do a little survey together. Let's see what gets you guys angry. And I'm going to need some participation out of you guys to help me out, you know? And so if I'm going to show you a picture. And if this thing gets you angry, I need you to verbalize that for me. You guys with me? Like, whether it's just a yell or a grunt, or if you want to sound like a pirate, just go, "Arr," or whatever that may be. Like, you do something. So I'm going to practice with you guys. Really, on a count of three, I need you to like give me some sort of angry noise. Is that okay? So on a count of three. 1, 2, 3. Oh, that's good. Not bad, not bad. All right. So real quick, this first picture, see if this gets you angry. Traffic. Anybody? A few of you guys? All right, yeah. So, you know, traffic, especially, you know, we're living on this side of the city. If you have to go into town, you have to hit the tunnel monster. It's awful, right? All right, so that's that one. How about this one? Anybody? Okay, there's a few. This is a fun one because this doesn't bother me at all. But if you talk to my wife, Danielle, she pretty much thinks I'm one of the most evil people in the world for treating toothpaste like this. Like squeezing in the middle, I don't think it's a big deal. But some people, it makes them really angry. How about this one? This one gets me, though. Anybody? Right? That's what I'm talking about. You're trying to make a nice fried egg, and one of the yolks break. It's horrible. Thank you. All right, next one. Express shopping lane, and we have this guy in line. Anybody? Yeah, oh, that one got you guys. Yeah. There's just some things in our society that make us angry, and it's the guy who can't read that there's only 15 items or less in line, and then he's got like a whole shopping cart full, and he or she doesn't care. But this guy, yeah, there's a special place for him. But anyways, so I'm just kidding. I'm joking. We got grace for him too. Anyways, but there's these things that make us angry, and these are kind of fun things that make us angry, as frustrating as they are. It's really funny. My 6-year-old Noah, he's already getting really angry at this idea of traffic because we live in Pittsburgh, so we deal with traffic every once in a while. So if we're driving somewhere, I could just be hitting the brakes. He goes, "Oh no, do we have traffic?" And it's like, buddy, it's a red light. Like, we can't go anywhere right now. But his first thought is traffic because he hates it. But those are some fun things. But there's actually other things that make us angry that are more serious. Things that can really get into us. We see it in our culture. We see it in politics. We see the anger that's taking place all over our world with that. We see it across our world. There are wars going on all the time. And according to the FBI, there is a violent crime that happens in our nation every 24 seconds. Aggravated assault happens every 48 seconds. There's a murder every 23 minutes. Domestic violence is the #1 cause of emergency room visits by women in our country. And 1,500 people are killed or injured each year in cases of road rage. We have a problem in our culture with anger. It burns out of control, and it hurts ourselves and hurts other people. We see it at work. People just seem to be angry all the time. We see it at home. We get angry with the person we promise to spend the rest of our lives with. We get angry with our kids. They don't get along with each other, or they're not listening to us, and then anger ensues out of that. So many things can make us angry. But however, the biggest issue here isn't us being angry. The issue becomes when that anger starts to burn out of control and starts becoming this uncontrolled flame that's putting us all in danger. Our anger grows into this inferno, and that can cause some serious harm. So the question we want to explore today, and as we go throughout this series over the next 2 weeks, is what do we do about this anger issue we have in our lives and the lives of others around us? And I think the thing we have to recognize is this, and this truth, is this: anger comes from God. Now, this may sound weird because anger kind of has a negative context in our culture. That's a bad thing. Even though we all do it, we all just automatically think anger's bad, anger's bad, anger's bad. But the truth is, anger comes from God. This may seem weird, but it's not meant to be a bad thing. Anger is an emotion that God has wired us with. It's something that is actually from God. It's actually part of God's nature himself. In fact, in the Bible, it records that God getting angry 250 times throughout the Bible. So 250 times throughout the story of God and his redemption process of rescuing us and putting our lives back together, it records that God gets angry 250 times. Now, in the Christian faith, we believe that God is perfect and God is without sin and God is all-knowing and all-powerful and all-present. So when God does things, this is part of his perfect nature. So that means even in his anger, he's not doing anything wrong. So in and of itself, anger is not a bad thing. Anger is something that God has given us to experience in this life. And so it's really important for us to understand that anger comes from God, and that's a good thing. However, God gives us some very important instructions when it comes to dealing with our anger. And that comes down to knowing that there's healthy anger and there's unhealthy anger. Healthy anger is something that where we see something like injustice, and that and it leads us to action to change and help in a situation. We see Jesus doing this a couple times in his life, actually. We see, sometimes we can think of Jesus as this like meek and mild, very chill individual, but we see moments in his life where that's not the case, like in John 2:13 through 16. It says this: it was nearly the time for the Jewish Passover celebration. So Jesus went to Jerusalem. In the temple area, he saw merchants selling cattle, sheep, and doves for sacrifices. He also saw dealers at tables exchanging foreign money. So Jesus made a whip from some ropes and chased them out of the temple. He drove them out. He drove out the sheep and cattle, scattered the money and changers' coins over the floor, and turned over tables. Then, going over to the people who sold doves, he told them, "Get these things out of here. Stop turning my Father's house into a marketplace." And what was happening in this context of what's taking place in this story is at the temple, this is where people would come and worship God. And part of that Jewish culture is they would come and they would make sacrifices as an atonement for their sins and their mess ups, and just to kind of say, God, I'm worshiping you, I love you, I've messed up. Here's a sacrifice to kind of make up for that prove to you how much I care and worship and love you. But what's happening is the people in that culture, they knew this. And so when people would come to the temple, maybe they didn't have an animal or grain or anything to sacrifice to God. And so what they would say is, that's okay, we got some nice stuff we can sell you right here so you can go into the temple and worship and sacrifice that. Or they would do things where someone would bring something to sacrifice, and the religious leaders would go, you know what, there's a defect in that dove you want to sacrifice right now. Yeah, the one wing is maybe a little shorter than the other wing, and so that's just not good enough for God. So we're going to take that away from you, but you can buy one of ours for us right now. So you buy that, and then that's a really approved way you can make this sacrifice happen. And what they would do is they would do this over and over again, and most of the people who were coming to the temple were poor. They didn't have the money to be buying things for sacrifices, but they would do whatever they could because they knew as part of their faith, as part of their religion, they would have to make these sacrifices as a way to worship and honor God. And the temple was designed to be this place for people to come and connect with God and to pray and to make atonement for their mess ups and their sin and their screw ups in life. And Jesus sees this, and Jesus sees this temple, and they're coming to this Passover feast, which is one of the biggest celebrations the Jewish people had each year. So all these people were coming, extra people were coming to the temple, and people were just making bank off selling them all these things. And Jesus sees this, and he gets angry. And not just angry as, hey guys, stop doing that. Angry to the point where he got some materials together, made a whip out of it, a rope, and starts swinging that thing around. And Jesus just starts clearing this temple, getting people out of there, getting the animals out of the temple, going over to people saying, get these things out of here. Stop making my Father's house a marketplace. This is supposed to be a place of worship. Jesus is angry in this situation, and his anger leads him to do things that maybe we don't even think about the Son of God doing very often. Yeah, we think of him as this very quiet, mild-mannered guy. A guy goes around teaching, hey, love your enemy as yourself. Give to the poor. And he did these things, but Jesus had emotion. Jesus got angry, and he especially got angry when people were taking advantage of other people. And in this situation, that is what's happening, and Jesus tells them to get out. Healthy anger can do what Jesus did. In that moment, Jesus wasn't sinning. Jesus saw a broken situation where people were being exploited. And he went and did what he could to help alleviate that situation. This is healthy anger. And this is what healthy anger can lead to. But unhealthy anger is different. This is the anger that can cause us to hurt and bring violence to ourselves, whether verbally or emotionally or physically. This is the anger that can grow into an inferno and cause hurt to us and those around us. And we see this anger in Genesis 4. I'm just giving different examples right now. Genesis 4, 3 through 8, we see this. We have two brothers, Cain and Abel. And Cain was a farmer and Abel was a shepherd. And God asked them to bring a sacrifice to them. So we see this. When it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. The Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry, and he looked dejected. Why are you so angry, the Lord asked Cain. Why do you look so dejected? You will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at your door, eager to control you, but you must subdue it and be its master. One day Cain suggested to his brother, let's go out into the fields. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother, Abel, and killed him. And so what's taking place here is God asked Cain and Abel to bring a sacrifice to him. And so Abel, the one brother, he's the farmer. He brings the best of the best to God. He brings the choice of the firstborn lambs of his flock, which is like the highest ranking of his flock. He's bringing that to God, saying, God, here's my best. I'm not giving you my leftovers. I'm giving you the best I could possibly give you in this situation. Now, Cain, on the other hand, he was worshiping God. But he did it in a way as like, yeah, I have to bring the sacrifice to God. I should probably go do this. Hey, I'm going to grab some of these crops I've grown. Here, God, here's what I got for you. And God knew this. And God knew the heart between Cain and Abel here. And he goes to Abel and says, I accept this because I know you're worshiping me. But Cain, you're just throwing me whatever you got. You don't really care in this situation. And here, Cain starts getting angry, and God even warns him, hey, sin is creeping at your door. Cain wasn't sinning in his anger yet. But Cain gets so angry in this situation. He gets so angry at his brother because his brother did what was right. He goes out, they go out into the field. He's like, hey, let's go hang out there. And Cain kills his brother Abel. His anger leads him to take the life of his brother. This is the anger that is unhealthy. This is the inferno. This is the stuff we still see today. Anger that leads to death. Anger that leads to abuse, verbal and physical abuse. Anger that tears down others. Anger that hurts others. This is the unhealthy stuff that we need to address in our lives and in the culture around us. This is when our anger turns into something wrong. And when it comes down to anger, here's the root of both situations here. Jesus's and Cain and Abel's situation. It's this. Anger comes from we didn't get something we wanted. I mean, break that down as simply as you can. Where does anger come from? It comes from the place that we didn't get something we wanted. In both these situations, with Jesus and with Cain and Abel, both situations, someone didn't get what they wanted. Jesus wanted his Father's house to be a place of worship because that's what it was designed for. He didn't want people to be taken advantage of, but they were being taken advantage of. And so his anger came out of this place from something that he wanted something done, and it didn't happen. That's where his anger came from. Same thing happened with Cain. Cain wanted to be accepted by God. He wanted to be this, it made right with God. But his anger came out of a place that his brother did something better than he did. So he didn't get what he wanted, and that's where his anger came from, and then it led him to do other things. And that's it, really. We don't get something that we want, and that leads to anger. We don't get the job promotion that we want. We get angry. Our spouse doesn't meet our expectations, so we get angry. Our kids don't do what we ask them, and they don't listen, so we get angry. Our parents split up, and there's anger. And all these cases of anger, unhealthy anger can come out of that. And that's what it comes down to. Now, I'm not saying these things are easy things to deal with. I'm not saying that anger shouldn't come out of these situations. It's disappointing when you don't get the job promotion you were working for. It's disappointing and frustrating when you have dinner ready for your spouse and then you get the phone call last minute because they're going to have to stay later at work and that dinner was wasted. It's painful and difficult when your kids don't listen to you over and over and over and over and over again. It's difficult when your parents split up. It's difficult when things in life don't go the way we want. It's not easy. I'll never say that. God never says that. All these are very real, honest situations, but because we don't get what we want, it can often lead to this unhealthy anger. And that leads us to doing one of two unhealthy things that we shouldn't do when it comes to anger. Remember, anger isn't the problem. It's when that anger becomes out of control. That's the problem. And here's the two things that we shouldn't do, but we often do when it comes to anger. We either dwell on it or we deny it. Paul wrote in Ephesians, in his letter to that church there, he says this in Ephesians 4:26, and don't sin by letting anger control you. Don't let the sun go down while you are still angry. So Paul is this guy who used to despise Christians. We mentioned this before at this church, but used to hate Christians and eventually became a Christian himself. And he devoted his life to telling other people about Jesus and instructing us on how to live when it comes to following Jesus. Along the way in Paul's life, he had been beaten. He had been flogged. He had been shipwrecked 3 times. He'd been put in jail multiple times. People tried to stone him to death. And all these took place because of who he was as a Christian. So if anyone has the right to be angry, it's Paul in his life because messed up things happened to him. Lots of things that he wanted to have happen didn't take place for him. But Paul understands what the damage of unhealthy anger can do in our lives. So he says, don't sin by letting anger control you. And this is what we do when we dwell on anger. We dwell on it. We are angry about something or someone and it just eats at us and we constantly think about it and our life's actions are dictated by it. And Paul is saying here, don't dwell on anger because it's going to take a hold of you. We essentially become this flamethrower because of our anger. This is when we lash out in anger constantly. It also becomes a much bigger issue than it initially was because all we do is put our focus in it. So imagine that maybe something happening at work where something happens where your boss says something or gives you a project or a coworker does something and it just triggers you. And that anger's there. And they usually don't even know they did something to make you angry. But what you start doing is you start dwelling on it. You start thinking about it. You start marinating on it. And you make all these situations take place. And all of a sudden, somebody else says something to you, and you snap at them because you're angry. Because you've been dwelling on the situation that took place recently, and it just becomes something that starts off as anger and grows to be something that's out of control. Or you go home and you bring that anger from your bad day at work with you at home, and you snap at your spouse, you snap at the kids because it's just been a long day. I'm sure a lot of us can relate to that context. We've probably all been through that. But this is what I mean when we say we should be dwelling on the anger. When Paul says don't sin by letting anger control you, he's saying don't dwell on it. Because then you're giving that anger the fuel it needs to become this inferno. We can't dwell on it. So we lash out. When we dwell on our anger, it takes a hold of us and leads us to sin. It leads us to brokenness. That's why we can't dwell on it. So Paul says that, but then he says this. He says, don't let the sun go down while you're still angry. And the word here is deny. We have a tendency to do one of two things. We dwell on it or we deny it. He's saying don't stuff it down inside and act like nothing happened. We try to pretend like everything is fine, and it's really not. And usually, depending on our personality, we usually do one of these two things. We hold it in and we deny our anger thinking that it will go away, but it never really does. It just starts becoming this rotting thing inside of us. It's kind of like this. Do you ever put something in the trash at night before you go to bed and you forgot to take it out to the, outside in the garbage? And the next morning you wake up and you smell like something died up in your kitchen. This is what happens when we just start denying that we have anger. It becomes this thing that just sits inside of us, and we just ignore it, and we try to forget about it, but all of a sudden, that thing just starts rotting inside of us, and all of a sudden we realize, you know what, life is not good right now. There is this stench of anger that's just overflowing eventually, and we have to do something about it. And so we start resenting our boss or our coworkers because we didn't get something we wanted. We don't tell them that, but anytime they come around, we just start fuming inside. And we don't even show our anger, but inside it's affecting us in so many negative ways. It's to the point where it causes stress, it causes anxiety, and this is what can happen when we deny the anger that's sitting inside of us. When we dwell on it, it causes us to maybe have outbursts. When we deny it, it just sits inside, just starts just infecting us from the inside out. We hold bitterness towards our parents because they split up a long time ago. We don't want to talk about it with them. When we see them, they have no idea we're feeling this way, but we know we have that resentment just sitting there. And it impacts the way we think, impacts the way we talk, impacts the way we react with them. This is a struggle that I've had in my life. My father was an addict when I was in high school, with drugs and alcohol, and my parents split up. And to this day, I still struggle even being around my dad because of what he did. This is something I struggle with denying anger. I kind of just keep it inside, and all of a sudden, when I'm around him, it starts festering up again. Now, I don't lash out at him, but inside it bothers me. That's not healthy. That impacts the way I think, it impacts the way I talk, it impacts the way I live, it impacts the way I worship and follow Jesus. And this is what can happen when we deny our anger too. It's like when you ask someone how they're doing, and they just respond to you by saying, I'm fine. That's what we do when we deny it. We just keep it down inside. So we dwell on it or we deny it, but all of this can lead to unhealthy anger. So what we have to do is we have to address what this anger is. We see that God gave us anger. This is not a bad thing. And we see Jesus using it in a healthy way. And we saw how Cain and Abel, their situation led to unhealthy anger. The situation is not our anger. The situation is how it becomes this out-of-control fire. So when that takes place in our lives, what we have to do is a couple things when it comes to addressing the fire. And the first thing we do is this. We need to identify the source of the fire. You have to recognize the source of the fire. You need to recognize that you are angry and then ask, why am I angry? What didn't I get that I wanted? This is something that I'm learning to do in life, and almost every time we get angry because something didn't go our way. So we have to recognize, and we start feeling that. When maybe we feel the outburst coming, or we start just kind of putting it inside us, and we feel anger just kind of creeping in our lives, we have to ask ourselves, where's this coming from? Where's the source of this fire at? What's the identity of this fire? And so when we identify it, that's going to help us know how to douse the flame. That's the second thing we have to do. Once we know the source of the fire, we can start to douse the flame. And this is not as simple as just saying, okay, now that I know I'm angry, I should just stop being angry. Like, that doesn't work, right? Like there's been times I've been frustrated or angry about something, and Danielle goes, just calm down. And I'm like, I can't calm down. It makes me even more angry. You know what I'm talking about? Like, I'm just out of control in that situation. And so we have those things take place. We have to douse the flame, but we don't douse the flame by just simply saying, stop being angry. It's more than that. You see, when firefighters are putting out a fire, they aren't just throwing water wherever the flames are at. They're actually trying to get to the source of that fire, whatever is feeding the fire. They get down to that base situation to douse the situation at its foundation. And that's what we have to do with our anger. We don't just try to take away the things that are affecting it on the long term. We have to go down to the root cause of it. So we have to do that in a number of ways. And that just isn't one way to do it, but it always starts with our hearts when it comes to our relationship with God. If you want to know how to douse the flames of your anger, it starts with your relationship with God. It starts with God. Because only God is the one that can change our hearts. So we need to ask God for help. We need to recognize that we are angry. We need to ask God to change our hearts in these situations. Maybe other people are causing the fire, but we're the ones getting angry ourselves. So God needs to come. We need to give him permission to come in and change our hearts in those situations. We need to pray, God, I'm angry and I didn't get that promotion. Can you help me be content with what you've already given me? God, I'm angry that my friend is getting married and I'm still single. Can you help me with my loneliness in that situation? God, I'm angry with my kids. Can you help me be patient and realize the blessing that I have in my children? We need to go to God in prayer, in worship, in submission to God to realize, hey, God, in this anger, I need your help. It always starts there. Because guess what? No matter what you do, there are always going to be situations and people in life that are going to do things that make you angry. And you can't control those situations. But you can control how you react to them. And it starts with God changing your heart. It starts with you going to God and saying, God, help me douse the fire of this anger right now. We need God's help in our anger. And then from there, there's some other things that God's put in place that we can do to help us with our anger to make sure it doesn't become this inferno. Maybe you need to talk to a person you're angry with. Maybe you need to hash out some things. Maybe there's someone in your life that every time they're around, you're just angry about something they did, like me and my father. So maybe what you need to do is have a conversation with them. Maybe you just say, hey, listen, maybe you're unaware of this, but I'm struggling right now with some anger with something you did or something we went through together, whatever it may be. And you start kind of hashing that out. And again, maybe you can't control what they say or do, but you can control what you say and do when it comes to forgiveness, which helps douse that flame. When it comes to grace, because the grace that God's giving you, you can give grace to them. That's going to help douse that flame of anger. Maybe you need to talk with them. Or maybe you need some accountability with your anger. Maybe you need someone to come around you, and this is something I've noticed is really helpful for me, is when I can confess to other people that I get angry a lot of times, and they go, actually, me too. We can say, hey, how you doing with that? How are we doing with our anger? Maybe that's something you need in your life, having some accountability there. This is why we do small groups with One Church. Now, it's not just about anger, but it's just about walking and doing life together and encouraging each other in the situations we have in life. And small groups are a great way to build relationships, and they're a safe place to open up about your struggles. Most commonly, probably with all of us, is anger in some way, shape, or form. And if you're not in a small group, we'd love to help you connect with one. We have ones that meet on Tuesday nights and Thursday nights, and this is a perfect time to jump in because we're all kicking off new studies together as small groups, so we'd love for you to jump in with one of those if you're not. If you're interested in that, check out the information tables. We can talk with you there before you leave here today, but we'd love for you to be a part of one of those things. Small groups together can help us douse those flames. Or maybe it's deeper than that. Maybe you need to do something like talk to a professional counselor on some things. Now, this may be a taboo thing in our culture, like, oh, I don't need help. I can handle this myself. We're proud Pittsburghers, right? We don't need help from other people. But sometimes we do, and there's nothing wrong with that. And there are people who are trained and skilled at helping us deal with situations like our anger. Maybe that's something you do, is maybe talk to a professional counselor. If that's you, here's what I want to encourage you to do. If you need to talk to somebody, shoot me an email. Shoot the church an email, and we'll get you a list of counselors that we know in this area that are really good in these things. We'd love to help recommend people that can help you in this. We'd love to give you that help to help douse those flames. Or maybe you just need to spend some time, personally reflecting in your own life, having some personal one-on-one time with God. If that's you, here's what we're going to be doing. Tomorrow, on Monday, we are posting a 7-day devotional on our social media. It's going to take you through 7 days of talking about this idea of anger. It's going to take you through Scripture. It's going to have you kind of answer some questions on your own, have you have some time to reflect on with prayer with God and things like that. But this is a chance for you to kind of dig in individually and say, God, I need your help in this. Let's just spend some time together in prayer and Scripture. And there's a nice 7-day devotion we're going to go through together as a church. And here's the best way to get that. If you're on social media, if you have it, go to our Instagram page or our Facebook page. Just look up One Church Pittsburgh. You can have that. We'll post both of those there tomorrow. You just click the link and go that way. If you don't have one of those, we'll shoot an email out too as well that's going to include that link tomorrow. But make sure you do it. And set a time each day to say, I need to spend some time with God in this and talk about this, because all of us deal with anger in some way, shape, or form. And so we're going through that this week. I'd love for you guys to jump in on that too. But all these things are meant to be things that are going to help us douse the flame of our anger. It's going to help us make sure that our anger, when we have it, which isn't a bad thing, make sure it doesn't become this out of control inferno that's going to burn us and burn the people around us. These are important things. And then lastly, when it comes to our anger, here's the last thing I want us to walk away with. We need to get angry about the right things. I mentioned how anger is something that God has given us multiple times. It's an emotion, a tool that we have to deal with the things that lead us in life in our actions. So in all of this, make sure you don't miss it. I'm not telling you that anger is not a bad thing. I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying it's a good thing because God's given it to us. But unhealthy anger is a bad thing. Healthy anger is not. And honestly, I think as a church, I think as people, we can use some more healthy anger in our lives. And maybe you've never heard that before. But I believe that we could use some healthy anger in our lives. And we can do that by getting angry about the right things. And I think the way we do that is knowing the difference between God's will and my will. We get angry because something doesn't go our way, so does God. Jesus was angry because something didn't go his way, and Jesus was God in the flesh, so we get angry about those things that don't go our way. However, though, God's anger is sourced out of people not living the way he knows they need to be living. It's really sourced from his love for us. Our anger is normally out of selfishness. When it comes to God, it's for love of people. Our anger is usually sourced out of our own kind of desire for our own things, our own wills, our own desires for jobs or family or relationships, whatever that may be. So when it comes to anger, though, are we mad about what God's will not being done, or are we mad more about my will not being done? That's the big difference that we have to look at. You see, when Jesus flipped tables in the temple, he was angry because God's will was not being done. When Cain killed his brother, he was angry because Cain's will was not being done. And that's a huge difference, and that's the difference for us to walk away with today. And just to be clear, being angry because of God's will never gives us permission to treat anybody with judgment or hate. God's anger was rooted in love, and that love sent Jesus. But when it comes to us having healthy anger, the right anger, the anger that's rooted in God's will, it should lead us to invest in people, to love people, to spend time with people. It should lead us to do whatever we can to stop injustices from happening. It should lead us to do whatever we can to end racism and prejudice and any sort of brokenness that's in our culture, in our lives, in our workplaces, or in our families. We should be rooted in what God is desiring for our lives, and that should lead us to have a healthy anger to do something about it. So are you angry that your neighbor doesn't know Jesus? Or are you angry that you didn't get a raise in your salary? Will you be more angry about people who are lacking food during this coming holiday season? Or are you more worried about the person cutting in line or having more than 15 items in their cart in line? What are we getting angry about? Are we angry about my will, or are we getting angry about God's will? Where is your anger focused on? And that's the one thing we need to walk away with. My anger should come from God's will, not mine. When it comes to us following Jesus, when it comes to us submitting to who God is and what he's done with us and for us through Jesus Christ, when we follow Jesus, we are saying that my life is now committed to following Jesus. That my will, my desires, my selfishness starts dying, and God's will starts becoming more. So what God wants, that's what I want. What God hurts for, that's what I hurt for. Where God feels there's brokenness, that's where I see brokenness. And it's those things that should lead us to have healthy anger. Maybe that's where we need to change going into this next season together. Your anger is hurting you and others, and the reason for that is you are more focused on yourself. This is where my anger comes from most of the time, because I'm more focused on myself. I'm more worried about my own life and my own will rather than God's will, and maybe that's time to change more. I think the best way to put out the inferno in your life is to change who's in charge of your life. You need to change from myself to Jesus. That's where things start shifting from God's will to my will, from my will. Jesus came to free us from the bondage of unhealthy anger. He came to give us freedom. He came to give us life, and we find that freedom in here. And anger is something that we all deal with. Anger is something that's always going to be there. But imagine the change in our lives, our families, in this church, in our community, in our world, if we started extinguishing the unhealthy flames and started flaming the healthy flames. Instead of encouraging that. The things that are broken, if injustice in the world, people who are far from God, what if those are the things that cause us this healthy anger to say, you know what, I need to make a difference there. Maybe it's not so much about me anymore, it's more about God. We could experience more freedom. We would experience more peace. We would experience more grace and more love. The world deals with enough anger that hurts, kills, and destroys. The anger that's rooted on our own wills is the one that leads to brokenness. But when we let Jesus be in charge and focus on God's will, our anger will lead us to love, it'll lead us to heal, it will lead us to build up. And that's the world Jesus came to show us and give us. And that's the life he wants for us. So in a moment, what's going to happen is the band's going to play and we're going to worship God some more. But we need to understand as we're going into this, that we need to address our own anger. Because here's what I know about all of us. I don't know everyone here personally. I don't know your deepest, darkest secrets. But I know you get angry. Because we all do. There's a difference, though, between getting angry for the right reasons and the wrong reasons. And that's rooted in whose will we're looking to worship. Are you looking to fulfill your own will, your own desires? Or are you looking to follow God and his desires? Is it your will be done or is it God's will be done? That's what's going to help us deal with this anger thing. It's by who we follow. See, God's anger was so strong that we were so far from him and so broken from him, he sent Jesus. His anger led him to love us so much that he sent his son to lay his life down for us. Now, a lot of times we think of God as just like this angry being, that if we don't do something right, he's just going to like smite us, we're done. I think we think that because we have our own unhealthy anger. We get angry about something, so we respond with fits of rage or sarcastic comments, or we just let it sit inside of us and just starts rotting from the inside out. And so we project that thought into who God is. That's not who God is, and that's not how his anger operates. God's anger led him to give up himself for you and me. And so each week we worship that truth about God. We worship God in that through communion. And maybe you haven't heard this in a while, but when we take communion together, we're literally remembering God's anger. That we've sinned, we've messed up, we've been broken, we are so far away from God, we could do nothing to get our way back. And God was angry about that because he loves us. And so to bring us back to him, God's wrath had to be paid for. That ransom had to be paid for, and it was paid through Jesus. And so God's anger led him to chase after us and to bring us back by sending Jesus. So we're going to pass communion here in a moment, and we're going to worship together because of who God is and what he's done. And in this time, I'm going to encourage you guys to think about this, to wrestle with this a little bit. Think about what makes you angry. What are the things that trigger you? And if you don't know and you're married, just ask your spouse because they're really good at telling you. Or even worse, ask your kids. They'll put you in your place. Or just ask someone that knows you. But start wrestling with, is your anger rooted in your own will or is it rooted in God's will? Because if it's yours, one of the bet it's probably unhealthy. But if it's God's, I'm willing to bet that's a thing that can lead to transformation. Let's pray. God, thanks so much for today. We thank you for this space. We thank you for the heat. We thank you for the people in the room, God, that you love so much. That you're just angry at the fact that we didn't know you, we were far from you, led you to send your son so that we could know you, that we could have life with you. And God, I pray that right now as we're going into this season of elections and Thanksgiving and holidays and shopping and stress and chaos, God, this can just fuel unhealthy anger in our lives. God, help us to recognize you in that, to ask you for help. God, help us to be willing to admit it, to identify that fire so we can start putting that out so it's not unhealthy and burning us and those around us. And God, help us to focus on the right things to be angry about. Things that are rooted in your will and not mine. Things that glorify Jesus and don't glorify me. Things that prop you up and not prop myself up. God, let that be the anger that drives us in a healthy way. God, we love you. We thank you for Jesus. And in your name we pray.